Welcome to the Jump Up. Jorge Sedano filling in for our fearless leader, Rachel Nichols, alongside our insiders today, Malika Andrews and Jonathan Givony, ESPN NBA Draft Insider. Coming up, we'll look back at this year's draft, and Jonathan will give us his thoughts on who has all-star potential in this rookie class. But first, yesterday, NBA.com released their all-decade team for the 10s. The 2010s, whatever we want to call it. And of course, there was raging debate on social media and talk shows about who was left out, who shouldn't have been on the list to begin with, and where guys were slotted in general. So basically just a normal day on NBA Twitter. Here's a list of the 3 all-decade teams. The first team, Steph Curry, James Harden, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard. Hard to argue there. Now we go on to the second team. Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, Anthony Davis, Blake Griffin, and Carmelo Anthony. And then the third team, D-Wade, Kobe, Paul George, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Giannis. So, Malika, which players selected were you most surprised by?
Well, I find it interesting that LaMarcus Aldridge is here in a Blazers jersey in that graphic. And LaMarcus Aldridge was a little bit surprising for me. And that's because his game's never been all that sexy, right? I mean, he was in Portland, he was an anchor there, and he had a lot of hype around whether or not he was going to re-sign with the Blazers. And then he went down to San Antonio. And since then, it's sort of been like he hasn't been this big name main attraction. So for me, when I saw that he was ranked 6th in total points scored, that was a little bit surprising to me. I forgot about that. So with a list that's, hard to make, it was him for me that I said,
Yeah, I mean, look, it was about buckets, basically, for LaMarcus. Jonathan, where were your thoughts? Who was the biggest surprise, I guess, for you?
Carmelo Anthony, I think, on the second team. I think that's a little bit questionable. We're going to get into some of the guys that maybe should have been ahead of him. But, the fact that Carmelo Anthony is sitting at home right now, there's not a team in the NBA that wants him. It's 2019. We're still in this decade. That, to me, has to count for something when you look at some of the names that were not on this second team. And Blake Griffin a little bit, too, but Melo is the main one for me.
Yeah, I thought Melo was probably a bit too high. And again, we'll kind of get into the specifics here in a bit. But LaMarcus Aldridge was the one because, again, you mentioned not a sexy game in Portland and then basically less sexy, I guess, in San Antonio in a lot of ways. So, yeah, I think that there are some guys that probably could have been left off. You can make the case that some guys could have been a little higher in some cases, which we'll do shortly. I could make the case, if it's just based on championships, too, maybe Dwayne Wade should be higher than the third team, considering his impact. And by the way, he walked away last year at 37 years old, still being a very good player in this league. So there's a lot of different ways, I guess, we can go with this. But let's turn our attention to the guys who were left off the list. I think one of the biggest omissions, all-NBA guy, obviously 3 championships. Malika, what do you make of Clay being left off the list?
He is one that I listed as a little bit surprising to not see on there too. But for me, when I'm thinking about championships combined with just consistency, Clay has been such a consistent contributor to the Golden State Warriors as they have become one of the most dominant teams in sports. So that was surprising for me. And then the 2 others I had were Kyrie and actually Dirk. Because just the continued excellence there for both of them was just a little bit surprising to see, Carmelo make that list and not those 2.
Yeah, Dirk Nowitzki is the greatest international basketball player of all time. There's no question that he needed to be here.
Until 2 seasons ago, about 18 points a game or more in the decade. So there's certainly room for him to be on there. And in that championship, he might have had arguably the biggest upset we've had in NBA Finals history, or at least in that conversation.
And you add, 2011 Finals MVP to that list. He was a 5-time All-Star. He averaged 20.8 points and 6.7 rebounds per game in 7 seasons of that decade. And so when we're talking about this, I realize this might sound silly, but 10 years is a long time. And so if you split that decade into 2, all right, first 5 years, second 5 years, you end up coming up with a lot more names of who could be on that list. But for the guys on the first team, what they all have in common, Steph, LeBron, those types of guys, is they've been dominant for a very long time. And so it's hard for 10 years to be able to consistently keep that level of play. And these guys are just in a league of their own.
Let me ask you about Giannis on the third team. Is there enough of a body of work to put Giannis on this list already?
Well, here's the thing. Yes, I think there is. But the reason that there he is up on the screen making the third team is because his breakout has really been over the last 2 seasons. He's become a player that we've said, wow, that is a unique skill set. His body has kind of caught up with his length. He's filled out. He's had his basketball IQ has increased, and he is an intensely committed worker. That being said, I think he's only going to move up on this list, and he's going to be one of those players that we could see in the All-Star game for the next 5-10 years. And so I think he will eventually make his way up to that first team.
Yeah, Giannis is going to be in that first team when we look at the next decade, clearly. And so, I mean, he's so young. He's just, really kind of emerged, one of the top 5-10 NBA players in the NBA. And so I see the argument for him being third team. I would not put him behind, Blake Griffin, Carmelo Anthony, but I understand what they were doing here, because if you're looking at the sheer number of points scored, I mean, those guys have more.
So let me ask you about that. Blake Griffin, Carmelo Anthony, I don't have a problem with them necessarily being on one of the 3 teams. I just don't know if second team was where I would have slotted those 2 guys. Jonathan, let's start with you. What are your thoughts? I mean, we know Carmelo, but your thoughts on Blake?
I wouldn't have him second team. I would definitely have Nowitzki over him. And I think, even Giannis has a strong case there. And like I said, some of those older guys like KG, like Nash, Klay Thompson, for me, definitely should be a second team guy. And so I don't see an argument for Blake Griffin ahead of those guys.
Yeah, he took the words right out of my mouth. I completely agree with that, and I think it's interesting to see just how much that body of work that you were talking about plays into who is considered on what list. Because if you were just looking at the MVP, Giannis would be higher, but we're not. We're looking at a long stretch of time, and so Blake just has a lot on his resume over that period of time.
All right, let's get to the polarizing part here. We had to save this topic for last. Otherwise, the entire segment probably would have been hijacked. But how do we feel about Kobe being on the third team? Jonathan?
Oof. Kobe should be on the second team. To put Melo over Kobe, I mean, I don't see any argument for that whatsoever. If you're looking at points, you're looking at championships, you're looking at MVPs, I mean, Kobe Bryant is far and away a better player than Melo, had a much better career, and so he needed to be on that second team pretty clearly to me.
If we're looking comparatively, I think that there are some people that he could have edged out to be on that second team. That being said, I took I waded into the anger on Twitter this morning. I just took a look at what people were saying, and they were up in arms. They were angry.
But a wide spectrum, by the way, not just because he was on the third team. Right.
For both people saying he was too high and too low and too hot and too cold. This is the Goldilocks syndrome coming in here. That being said, Kobe, for the first half of this past decade, was incredibly dominant. And then obviously the Achilles injury happened and he wasn't the same player. And so because of that, I do see why he was moved down the list. It's only when you look at who else was then on that second team that I see reason to move him up. If it had been Dirk or some of these other guys, if we weren't going by position in each of those 5 slots, then maybe he would truly belong on the third team. The only reason I'm willing to move him up, like Jonathan said, is because I think he could swap out someone like Carmelo.
Yeah, the injury, I think, plays a factor here, right? I mean, he certainly wasn't the same player after that injury, and he missed a big chunk of time and only played the first 6 seasons of, right?
It makes sense, yeah. I mean, Kobe Bryant, for me, is a top 5 player of all time. So.
Right.
To not have him.
Top 5 all time.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think he's that good. Yeah, and just the impact that he had on the league, on basketball.
Certainly yes.
And so I think he needed to be on that second team.
Yeah, here's the 60-point game, the finale. I mean, listen, I think that I've seen really good arguments for moving him up to second team. I, too, yesterday, this came out while I was on my radio show. And I thought, yeah, second team was kind of a good spot for him because I was moving guys up and down or whatever. But I saw some compelling cases for because of the injury and because of the way the career ended of even not necessarily having him because of guys like Dirk or KG or Clay or guys who maybe were a little more deserving of this particular decade. But, man, it just was great raging debate for August 5th or 6th. Come on, man. You can't get any better than that when it comes to the NBA. But anyway, let's move on. Vince Carter is heading back to the Hawks to play a record-setting 22nd season in the league. Ooh. After the break, we're going to run back Vince's top 3 dunks before his teammate Trae Young was even born. So stick around here on The Jump.
This is Wendy's Bacon Fest. And this is the bacon double stack in the $5 Biggie Bag. No one does bacon like Wendy's. So get to Wendy's Bacon Fest now and get a Biggie Bag with the bacon double stack, nuggets, fries, and a drink for just $5. Yo, Jer, we gotta get to the show. Get on the bus.
Jeep Wrangler. Freedom to do it all. Well-qualified lessees get a low-mileage lease on the 2018 Jeep Wrangler for $269 a month.
Look at you all fancy.
Fancy? I'm gonna be the most iconic designer of all time. The line for my stuff is gonna go for miles. So let's go. I got places to be.
Exxon and Mobil are introducing their Supremium fuel, new Synergy Supreme Plus. It keeps your engine 2 times cleaner for better gas mileage. That's why they've asked me, Mr. Supremium, to be their spokesperson. Everything of mine is Supremium. My ascot wears an ascot. My phone hasn't even been invented yet. Now to go to the beach. The beach.